Attention California drone operators, what you like to do is being threatened by a California legislator. Hey YouTubers, it's Back Focus 11, here from my undisclosed location. Now take a look at this video. This is of California State Senator Hannah-Beth Jackson. She's Democratic from Santa Barbara. She's proposing legislation to make what you do with your drones illegal if you fly over private property. Take a listen.
This is I think, a very interesting opportunity to address a subject matter that, frankly, I don't think has been talked about enough, and certainly recognizes that the future is here, and the question is, are we prepared for it? And given, I might say, the response to a rather confined bill I have done on introduced on drones, this is a subject matter that is absolutely wide open, and I think is ripe for a full and robust discussion. And hopefully today we are going to have that opportunity to consider both the promise and the pitfalls associated with this new and very exciting technology. We face the prospect of having potentially thousands of commercial and private unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, also known as remote piloted aircraft, or simply as drones, which I think we all recognize that title, to take out to California skies in the coming years. And this reality focuses our attention on whether state law is really prepared to incorporate these vehicles and the policy issues associated with their operation. How do we incorporate those into California's landscape? Now, again, this is not a distant, far-off future. The brave new world is here, and it is here now. Drones were a popular gift this holiday season. One of my staff members, in fact, got a drone for Christmas. He's still trying to figure out how to fly it successfully. He says these things are not easy, but he's determined to learn. I told him as long as it's on public space, he'll still have a job. And he assured me that that was exclusively his intent. Now, recently, just this past year, the FAA banned drones from the Super Bowl, declaring it a no-drone zone, which is an interesting title. A drone crashed just a few weeks ago into the White House lawn, and raised important security questions for our country at that point. Again, this is all sort of fomenting over a short period of time, and yet drone development has been going on for quite a while. I actually had my own personal experience a few months ago while in the backyard of a home where I was vacationing with my husband and friends, a place where we had an expectation that we could enjoy our morning coffee and figure out how to change the world. And suddenly a drone was about 15 feet away, hovering about eyeball to eyeball, taking photos of us. I had no idea who where this came from. It turned out it was a neighbor wondering who was in his neighbor's yard. I will tell you that that was quite disconcerting to see that, and really felt like a tremendous invasion of privacy, which is what sort of brought this issue to my personal attention. Now, we know drones are already becoming popular and prevalent, and it's time we began an important public conversation about their innovative uses, as well as the challenges they pose to our long-held values, and in particular, to our right of privacy. Here in California, the right of privacy is not an implied right as it is in the federal Constitution. The right of privacy is written into Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution of the State of California. Among our fundamental rights are life, liberty, property, and privacy. So here we are staring a drone eyeball to eyeball when we have a fundamentally protected right in our state. This oversight hearing, I hope, will just be the beginning of that conversation, and we'll examine how well we are prepared for the increasing prevalence of drones in our skies and, frankly, other innovative technologies which have been the subject of legislation in the past and will be, I know, going forward. We need to start asking ourselves these fundamental questions. When is the use of a drone appropriate, and when does it become an invasion of privacy? How do we balance our right to privacy with technological innovation? How do we ensure that we're not so dazzled by technology that we fail to notice the erosion of our fundamental rights? And how do we also ensure that our very legitimate concerns about privacy, property, and civil liberties do not necessarily restrict innovations that are beneficial to society? To assist us in exploring these issues, I've asked representatives from across industry and academia to better help us understand the impacts these drones will have in California, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that shortly. Drone technology is poised to revolutionize the way Californians do business on a variety of different levels, from delivering groceries and e-commerce orders to revolutionizing private security, to changing the way farmers image their crops. This technology holds a promise to transform entire industrial sectors. In fact, a recent report on drone technology projected that almost $12 billion will be spent globally on aerial drones over the next decade in these new commercial fields alone. However, as with most new technologies, the prospect of adding drones to our skies presents some very challenging public policy questions, to say nothing of logistics. First among these is how to welcome these new technologies into our lives without surrendering our right to privacy. And as I mentioned, this is written into our state's constitution. Whether we're in the private, commercial, or government sectors, we must fully embrace the fact that all Californians have this inalienable right to pursue and obtain privacy. And because of their inherent maneuverability and the ease with which they may enter spaces not possible for manned aircraft, the growth of this new technology presents a challenge to maintaining traditional boundaries that separate public and private spaces. The unrestricted use of drones, especially those that have sound and video recording equipment.
Now, she expressed concern about sound equipment on our drones. Let's take a listen to what kind of eavesdropping we can do.
Threatens to erode this fundamental right. In our country, we've already witnessed conflicts between neighbors over the use of these vehicles. Perhaps because we don't experience the immediate consequences of our actions, individuals are using drones to do things they wouldn't imagine doing in person, such as I mentioned, flying into other people's backyards and videotaping their neighbors.
Senator Jackson, in this video, I am flying over a piece of property I have permission from the landowner to fly over. From this legal altitude, I can see clearly into all the neighboring properties, no problem. This is an example of why your perceived privacy legislation is ineffective.
As a matter of public policy, we need to consider the impact these vehicles will have on our communities, and we must find the path that balances these challenges with the opportunities for innovation that these items present for our future. I have a bill I mentioned, SB 142. It represents an attempt to strike a balance, particularly with defining the boundary line between private property and public airspace. With this, I hope to set clear expectations for both industry and the public that preserves that distinction between private spaces and public spaces. I'm delighted that we'll be joined here today by stakeholders with expertise in privacy, free speech, property rights, and land management who can help illuminate some of the areas where California needs to focus as it crafts policy to integrate drones into our world. And I'd like to emphasize that this is indeed a state issue. I'm sure everyone has heard of the FAA unveiling its draft regulations this past Friday on drone operations, and that the President issued a memorandum governing how federal agencies conduct drone flights and gather information with these machines. These are important public conversations, and I'm pleased that after quite a bit of delay, the FAA has finally moved forward with its rulemaking and its proposals. However, that does not mean that we as state policymakers should simply wait for Washington to act. Horrors. Quite to the contrary, drone operations in our airspace raise critical state law issues ranging from how we define property rights to how we protect our unique wildlife. our majestic state parks and scenic areas, the security of our public buildings, and our fundamental right to privacy. These are areas where we know as Californians and as California legislature, we need to ensure that our state is ready for these new technologies. Now, the good news is we're not going to address all those issues in great detail today. If we were, we'd be here for another month. But we are hoping to focus, to get the conversation going, to do an overview, and we're delighted that we have people from the industry here to talk about the exciting opportunities and future that drones bring, but we should be steering. The California public has a right to know what these opportunities are, and the expectations of Californians need to be protected as we go forward. We should be steering the role we want these technologies to take. They should not be steering us. I hope this hearing will be just the beginning of a public conversation about the important role that drones can play in our lives, how we can harness their potential while ensuring that our long-held values, particularly our right to privacy, are not being compromised.
Next, I want you to listen to this radio interview Senator Jackson did on KQED Public Radio up in the Bay Area. You can see she has a very strong privacy stance and looks at our drones as a threat. Do you want to be stuck just flying at AMA flying fields, or would you like to be able to fly where you would like to fly? Well, listen.
We don't have any regulation on drones. We know that it's a trespass if you jump over my fence into my backyard without my permission. That's a trespass. But with a drone, there are no regulations. So my legislation basically says that kind of behavior is the same as someone jumping over your yard or a fence into your yard, and that's a trespass. And that's sort of the beginning of the discussion. There's certainly places we need to go to talk about what is an appropriate use of a drone, where it should be flying, and where it shouldn't be flying.
All right, let's go to law school for a minute. This is the wording of SB 142, the way it was written at the time of this video. Let's go to paragraph B for a minute. A person wrongfully occupies real property and is liable for damages pursuant to section 3334 if without permission he or she operates an unmanned aerial vehicle below the navigable airspace as defined in paragraph blah, 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 blah. Well, this is the sticking point. Navigable airspace. Where does that begin and where does it end? And are drones able to fly in there? Now, this law is set to amend the civil code. That means if you violate this, you won't get arrested, but you can be sued and have lots of money taken from you.
Well, your proposed legislation, which is Senate Bill 142, and as I've said, the hearing was actually held yesterday. I want to find out what resulted in that hearing, and I know you want public input here. But I was reading an article in Forbes by Gregory McNeil who says airspace isn't defined in this legislation. It makes no reference to what is navigable airspace, and that's going to make it impossible, really, to essentially bring into fruition. Your thoughts?
Well, the hearing we had yesterday was on the use of drones in general. Is California ready for drones? Is California law ready for drones? And talked about the potential, the perils, and the impacts of drones to our privacy rights. So it really went beyond the legislation. Now, the legislation, of course, was introduced a week ago. It's going to go through, hopefully, a number of hearings where we'll tweak certain aspects of it, where we will define airspace. I actually appreciated the article in Forbes because there's really been no discussion about this previously, and certainly we will want to define what is acceptable airspace and what isn't, and have a discussion about whether or not drones should be flying over private property and for what purpose, and whether drones should actually be flying over otherwise secure areas, or whether they should be permitted in parks and places where people go to enjoy the out of doors, where there are potential environmental impacts to wildlife and other things of this sort. The issue of height is one that we can solve. The challenges are going to be just just the extent to which we allow the use of drones or encourage the use of drones, and then ask, what about the impacts on privacy? What about the impacts on security and the impacts on safety? And that was part of the discussion we had yesterday at the hearing.
Yeah, the knotty question is, when is something an invasion of privacy? But if it goes into your property, as you say, it's a trespassing, and there's very little doubt about that. In fact, state constitution, unlike our federal constitution, ensures privacy is an inalienable right.
Oh, absolutely. And that's part of what makes this an interesting discussion, because the question becomes, to what extent do we allow innovation to trump our fundamental rights? And the right of privacy, as you mentioned, is specifically articulated in Article 1, Section 1 of the California Constitution. It says fundamental is a right of life, liberty, property, and in California, privacy. So we have very strong feelings about privacy. And in fact, studies have shown that throughout the country, there was a Reuters poll in January showed that drones have sparked fears of snooping by neighbors or law enforcement, and that 71% of those who were questioned said that drones should not be allowed to operate over someone else's property, and 64% they wouldn't want their neighbor to have a drone. So, there's a lot of concern out there for privacy, and this legislation and the hearings that we have, and I think we'll continue to have, really are designed to address that question and, as you say, to get public input on just how far we should allow that innovation to go.
But there is a kind of bullishness and enthusiasm about drones being good for the California economy, I assume?
Well, absolutely. I mean, drones serve some very, very constructive purposes. They're helpful in fighting fires. We had the military there. They worked with the Cal Fire to fight the rim fire. They can do search and rescue. They can do environmental monitoring. We had someone who testified yesterday that they used drones to test the explosion of methane gas in the Arctic, CO2 emissions, and to do animal surveys. They're helpful to agriculture. They can help target the delivery of pesticides, determine the health of crops. They do real-time management. They estimate it might increase agricultural production by up to 10%. On the other hand, there's some bad aspects to it.
Yeah, on the other hand, they can crash the White House.
Well, they
and
can
land
crash
on the White House lawn.
And they can crash on a street where you happen to be walking. We had some law enforcement talk about the potential use for terrorist activities, the drones flying over oil refineries, power plants, military facilities, in the back of a police station where someone might come in who is the witness or a victim of a crime, confidential informants. I mean, the scope, the potential for the use of drones is both exciting and scary. We have to break down drone use. Some of it is by the government, and some of it is by the private sector. And we have to be clear that these really have, or do they have, different applications. Most of the public supports the idea of using drones for law enforcement purposes. But we do have a requirement that in order to have a search of a home, there has to be a warrant. And that brings in, how we go about how expansive do we allow drones to be used for government purposes. Our hearing actually dealt with the use of drones in the private sector for commercial purposes, for individual purposes. So the issue about government uses under the search and seizure laws really does come to a question of whether or not and under what circumstances a warrant should be required. But then there's also the use in the private sector, and that can be quite invasive as well. So we need to address these problems both as separate issues, but then as an overall issue, as your guest says, we need to adapt to the new technology, but also perhaps the new technologies have to adapt to our expectations of privacy, our constitutional rights, and work together to find a way to use the technologies while at the same time not sacrificing and undermining those fundamental rights that don't necessarily have a monetary amount associated with them. I mean, what is the value to us of our privacy? Is there a dollar amount? Is there the fact that, we might enhance our economies, we might put people to work, but the question is at what cost? And that's a question both in terms of police work and also access of information that drones can accumulate in the private sector.
Well, the big question also is, in my mind, how fast and how rapid this technology is going to advance. A lot of it is unpredictable. I'm just wondering, though, also with the trespassing on private grounds, I think that's almost a simple equation. People will need permission to use a drone, or else they're trespassing. Isn't that pretty much where you're headed with this?
Well, that's the purpose of this particular bill that I brought. It's quite narrow. It deals with just the reaction that I get from most people. Well, of course, our backyards are private, and a drone, like a person, is actually trespassing if they come on without your permission. But right now, frankly, there is no law on that with respect to drones. So this should be, and I hope you're right, I hope it's an easy extension of the trespass laws, because it is kind of narrow, and it does deal with what I think most of us have is a reasonable expectation of privacy within our own yards, our own backyards, our own homes, and certainly at a low enough altitude. I mean, I was told yesterday that there are helicopters that can be a mile up or very high up that you barely see them, but if you can see them, they can see you too, and they can focus their cameras at such an angle that they can actually see into your living rooms. That's kind of disconcerting. But this drone issue, if that thing is hovering not far over your head, you can see it, and it is peering right at you without your permission. That clearly is, I think, an invasion of privacy, and that the public has an expectation that will be prohibited.
Let me go to the public. We'll take our first caller from Jesse in Sonoma. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
Welcome.
Hey, I'm a UAV consultant and operator up in the North Bay, and I just wanted to point out that a lot of people don't understand that you can use existing manned airplanes and helicopters and take video and all sorts of things into people's backyards or into private spaces, and that's still considered completely legal. So in that aspect, UAVs are no different.
Yeah, he makes a good point there. Bruce Parks, you want to respond? I mean, this is what Google's been doing for years, I think, isn't it?
Well, no, that's absolutely correct. I mean, there isn't any way that you're going to keep an aircraft of any sort, whether it's a high flying airplane or a low flying helicopter or a lower flying UAV, from intruding into people's airspace. I think it's really a question of proximity. I mean, you don't want it physically in your backyard. It's really, at least in my perspective. From my perspective, it's a matter of distance. At what point does that become intrusive? That's the question we have to ask, and the question we have to answer.
Well, you're asking that question, I guess, Senator Jackson, or were yesterday, weren't you?
Well, yes, and we did ask folks from the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse. I mean, basically, as you've just mentioned, we've been doing this for years. Is the cat out of the bag, or is this something that has been going on for years without really a robust discussion by the public as to whether or not that is acceptable? I mean, are we just simply going to accept the fact that, well, since it's been going on for years, since Google's been doing it for years and others, that it's okay, we're just going to live with it? Or is it possible to kind of bring that issue back to public consideration for potential action? I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but I think the public really hasn't both known about all the different technologies or had an opportunity to weigh in on it. And I think this might be a good opportunity to get that discussion going.
Well, let's hear from more of our public. We go to you next. Emma, join us.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my call.
Welcome.
Well, I am not a parent, but I certainly hope to be one day. And my question is there going to be any sort of legislation on monitoring who can buy drones and use them? Because I just keep thinking of people who have been convicted of a sex-related crime, and, you have to identify when you come into a neighborhood, but what if that person has a drone? What's going to stop them from following my son or daughter to school or in a public park? Is there going to be any sort of legislation to deal with this issue?
Has this come up, Senator Jackson?
Well, it's very interesting. This morning, I was having a conversation with one of the fellows that works in the Capitol, works in the janitorial services. He said, I heard the drone hearing yesterday. And he said, drones can be used for bad purposes by bad people. He said, I think that there should be background checks before people are allowed to buy a drone, and they have to be licensed. So here's just a member of the public who kind of asked the same question. And meanwhile, drones were one of the hottest selling items this Christmas for gifts, and as toys or as relatively inexpensive. I mean, they used to be thousands of dollars. Now you could buy a drone for a couple $100. They're not, I'm told, particularly easy to fly. But this is a very legitimate question. There is concern about what people are going to do with drones once they have access to them. And perhaps that is a discussion that we should have. Right now, anybody can buy a drone.
I thank Emma for bringing that up and appreciate her call, and go right to another call. That's you, Ned. Hi. Welcome.
How are you? I'm very excited about this issue. I spent my whole career working on these things for the FAA and for NASA and for the military, so I'll just briefly bring up 3 issues that hadn't been brought up. First of all, every one of these things, when they come down out of control, will have an impact force on the ground, dependent on a lot of technical features. 50 pounds is unquestionably way too heavy. Second, because when these things come down, they will land on private property, if not in a street. That means that they will be liable for trespass at the time they come down. Also means for whatever damage they cause or accidents they precipitate. And that means the insurance industry needs to be involved in this. And the third thing is, at the local level, we regulate land use. And at this point in time, these devices are industrial land uses. They're not commercial land uses, and it's going to have to all be gone over at the local level. Even though they fly in the air, they may be regulated by local land use.
What about the issue of noise pollution? In addition to concerns about privacy, what about the added noise that a fleet of drones is going to bring to our communities? I can't imagine that a stream of deliveries all day up and down my street is going to be silent. And questions about licenses and so forth. But let me read an email from a listener, Senator Jackson. The listener's name is Rich, and he writes, I believe the federal government has a complete preemption over what happens in the air. I do not believe that the California Senate or the state of California has an ounce of authority in this matter. Has Senator Jackson's staff been in touch with the FAA over their proposal?
The Supreme Court has also ruled that the state does have jurisdiction over portions of airspace. The rule of thumb has been that everything over 400 feet is controlled by the FAA. Everything under 400 feet can be controlled by the state. So we have looked at that. That is my understanding of the law today. So we actually do have a say in what happens. Now, the FAA regulations that just came out last week, or the proposed regulations that are going to be subject to further public input, try to supersede that. I believe as a state we will have to inform them of Supreme Court rulings and take control over that space which belongs to us. Of course, the FAA discussion last week didn't even mention the concept of privacy, didn't mention the concept of security, didn't mention the fact that, yes, indeed, if a drone gets out of control and falls, it can cause damage, it can strike somebody, it can do serious personal harm. They're noisy. The notion of noise pollution, again, it's something the public really needs to weigh in on and just ask the question, how much of this innovation do we want or are we willing to accept, especially as it impacts our fundamental rights to the enjoyment of our lives?
Well, here's a listener who gives personal testimony. Diane writes, I was at a stoplight in Moraga, and a drone came right down from the sky and looked in my windshield. I looked around for the operator and saw him on a nearby hillside, a horrified look on his face. I just waved, but could this be legal? He did manage to get it aloft before the light changed. Raises a lot of questions, as we've been pretty much pointing out in the course of this segment. A question for you, Bruce Sparks, just about the drone camera capabilities. Jeremiah wants to know, he says they're extremely advanced, and how does that affect height regulation?
Well, it in some ways it doesn't, because some of these cameras, as the senator recently pointed out, I mean, they can look in windows from great distance. So, I mean, that's something that I don't have an answer to, and I'm not certain that anyone really does. And I suppose that the difficulty with it is, if you're a mile away, how are you going to know that someone's taking a picture of your backyard? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not certain that there is one. But, you know, the real truth of the matter is we've been talking about this as people for a very long time. I mean, when hot air balloons were launched, people were complaining that they were landing in farmers' fields and ruining crops. It is something we have to look at. It's something we have to think about, and we have to just try to apply as much common sense to the issues and questions as we can.
Well, there are some environmental concerns. Let me go to a couple of emails here. Alan writes, I've yet to hear a discussion on the environmental impacts drones may have. I've watched people fly drones around Seal Rocks, which is an important nesting area for seabirds. People have also seen drones flying around protected snowy plover habitat. Could a drone crash cause a fire? I've been told that drones are illegal in the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, but there's no posting to inform the public and no enforcement. And Leslie writes, will drones bring an end to, a peaceful walk in the park, an open space which so many of us enjoy? Will drones increase the stress on wildlife, especially birds, where many species are already at risk? I've not heard discussion in the media regarding any limits in parks, local, state, or national. Has this come up with you, Senator Jackson, in your hearing?
Yeah. Yes, in fact, it has. And the national parks have prohibited the use of drones. I've met with, again, when I introduced this legislation it very narrowly, it opened a floodgate. And we heard yesterday as well from the California state parks that the impacts that drones can have. And it's absolutely correct on various wildlife. There are various kinds of birds and so forth that are impacted by this. They think that they are predators and respond accordingly. There are, I just think I represent a district with a beautiful coastline. The notion of walking along the beach and being buzzed by a drone overhead certainly would be a little bit shocking to the system. The same thing if you go up into a state park. In fact, we talked about this. I mentioned, I'm as someone walking in a state park, I'm more prepared to see a bear than a drone. And is that something I'm entitled to expect?
Okay, folks, so I hope that woke you up, especially if you live in California. We need to do something about this pending legislation. It's Senate Bill 142, and here on the bottom of the screen, I'm going to give you information on how to contact Senator Jackson. Tell her we don't want your legislation to be impeding what we do with our drones. We want to be able to fly anywhere we want, just like a commercial or a private aircraft. The airspace is completely open to the public, and no one has an expectation of privacy from aircraft overhead. Today, anybody can go to a local airport and charter a Cessna 172 or a Bell Jet Ranger and stick a 400mm lens out the window and shoot pictures and video of someone's property all day long. And it's completely legal by federal case precedents in the Supreme Court. Folks, the laws that get passed now will pave the way for the future for unmanned aircraft. And we need to have the right regulations in place, not just the federal FAA ones, but it's the local and state ones that are going to be a challenge and be the most restrictive to our hobby. All right, folks, that's it from Back Focus 11. Before we go, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, because coming up soon, if you subscribe to this channel and Demon Seed's channel, we will both collaboratively be picking one person that's going to win a unique Q500 drone. That's right, a free drone, just for clicking on a subscribe button. It's totally awesome. I want to thank our sponsor, Peter, at acesdeals.biz. Here's his website and his phone number. Give him a call. That's the place you want to buy your next drone from. Great service, and he gives you lots of attention. All right, folks, from the undisclosed location, we'll see you soon from Back Focus 11. See ya!